Hey everyone, Margarita here. I'm going to talk in this video today about how my son's dad is completely ignorant to the severe injuries that my son and I suffered from during labor and delivery, the results of all of that, what all happened along the way, and how we got to where we are today with everything. And what has been going on regarding this situation, because where we are in 2025, my son is now 9 years old. There's a serious problem going on because he has no regard for my son's life and keeps repeatedly putting his life in danger, acting as if what happened to us had never happened in the first place, and is attempting to continue on with life as if what we went through did not happen. The result of what we went through is not what it actually is. And then he's also telling other people information regarding this, and everything that he's telling people is not real. He is telling people that none of this ever happened to us, that I'm just crazy, and I'm not sure what else he's telling people, but it's very clear based on what he's been saying to me, that is what he's telling people. And so there is proof along the way. This is also why Charmaine had to remove him from my home 5 years ago. I'm going to start at the very beginning and explain every step of the way so that others can understand how it got to where it is today. Because I can't just jump into this and say, oh, well, this is what's been going on the past few weeks. It's way bigger than that. What we've been through is much more extravagant than that. And we've been through a lot to get us to where we are today and to even keep us alive in the first place, which he's also completely ignorant to. So when we were in the extreme part of the injury, he was not here in my home. He technically lived here, although at no point was he ever acknowledging the reality of the situation. He was not acknowledging that we were living in an extreme fight for our lives in an extreme medical emergency, which was initially left untreated within the traditional medical system, and that we were treating this on an outpatient basis, still in an extreme fight for our lives, homebound for the first several years of that, and spiraled to where we are today with it, living modified lives. And he's not with the reality of any of that in the current day. So the reason I'm making this video is because my son's life has been repeatedly put in danger, and he doesn't want to live in reality about how we're forced to live, the results of our injury, which are life-threatening, and what all happened at the time that he was here in my house, which wouldn't have gone on as long as it did if I was not in an extreme fight for my life. He would have been removed from my home by myself years prior if that was not my extreme situation. I just was not sure if I was going to live or if the baby was going to live. We didn't find that out. We didn't know until he was almost 5 years old. Once I spent enough money out of pocket on treatment to get us across the first threshold, it's not something I needed somebody to tell me. I knew exactly the state we were in. We could feel every step of the way. It's not some minor issue. It's not something that can be ignored or gone around. It was a very extreme injury, extremely overloaded with carbon monoxide in every cell of our bodies, with the brain having the majority of the overload, but still every cell of our bodies was also overloaded. You can feel all of that. It's not something you go to a doctor and somebody tells you this or that. It's such an extreme situation. And even when I was trying to seek help, medical professionals were acting like I was just there leisurely trying to figure out what's going on, when at no time was any of this ever questionable. I went from having zero medical history my entire adult life to being in an extreme fight for my life, along with a newborn baby in the same situation. We just didn't fully figure out what was going on for almost 2 years. So it's not some minor issue. It's not me trying to go somewhere and tell them, oh, this is going on, that's going on. No, it was so extreme. We were barely alive. And I couldn't even communicate what was actually going on because of the amount of brain injuries and how severe the situation was. And I was trying to explain that none of this is questionable. I already know what caused it. It's already all come out about what caused our situation. and how serious all of this is. We were unable to barely move from room to room in our home and could not travel from point A to point B due to how severe this situation was. So I was not able to make these videos until 2024 due to the amount of physical distress, the amount of brain injuries, and the amount of chaos that came out of all of this along the way. It wasn't even possible to film the videos, even though during this time frame that I'm talking about right now, I knew the videos needed to be filmed, but it was so extreme it wasn't possible to film these videos. I couldn't even talk because of the knots of carbon monoxide loaded up inside my brain, the amount of continuous brain swelling, brain sagging, brain fluid leaking out of my ears. Every word radiated extreme pain from the knots of carbon monoxide loaded up inside my brain. Every exhale breath was doing this. And as each breath was doing this, that's extremely painful. And you have to breathe. So I was stuck that way, unable to deliver information in the manner in which I needed to, and without the inability to have sound, on top of suffering 50 severe other symptoms at once, about 50, could be a little more, a little less, waxing and waning continuous symptoms, along with my son in the same boat as me. So once we found the private center, because I already saw we weren't going to receive treatment within the traditional medical system, I actually had to give up seeking treatment twice, knowing that if we didn't receive it, we were going to die. It was just a matter of time. And eventually I did find the private center right before we just weren't going to make it much further. I found them in the nick of time and began treatment. By the time that all happened, my son was then 3 years old. We were so close to death that it was a very long road of everyday treatment to get us across that first threshold where we weren't so close to death. That there was nothing else that we could do except for barely get through each minute alive through each day, suffer all these 50, 60 severe symptoms at once, day in and day out, every second of every day, and barely get ourselves to treatment and back each day, just to keep us alive. And it stayed that way for almost 2 years from the time treatment began. So by the time my entire household exploded and people had to be removed from my home, so this also pertains to my oldest son as well, because he was 18 at the time. Everything had it had just gotten so far out of control because the people around us were acting like this is not what was going on, and it's not something that could be ignored. This was an inpatient injury, and at no time should I have had any tasks on my plate whatsoever. We should have been in a long-term facility doing daily hyperbaric dives until our brain tissue was restored enough to treat this on an outpatient basis. And because that did not happen, it created 100 times more chaos than it should have. And the people around us continued on with their lives as if that's not what happened. At the same time, my deranged mother was in the mix as a Beaumont Hospital System employee who also had other employees enter false information into our medical records numerous times during this, before finding the private center. And that played a role in how others were perceiving our situation and what was actually going on with us, because she was preventing treatment as well, due to the Munchausen by proxy and due to the fact that she was trying to collect on the remaining portion of the trust fund that she was still trying to hide from me at that time. So there was numerous reasons this was all going on. She was controlling the behavior of those in my household and my dad, because my dad doesn't live in my household, but she was controlling his behavior, and he was coming to my house operating on the delusions she was telling him, and it was causing even more chaos. At the same time, my kid's dad was causing all these problems separately, not living in reality about anything that went on at any point during our injury. So for everything to end the way it did, in the same week my ex was removed from my home, in the same week that my oldest son was told he needed to go stay with his paternal grandmother, that lady was also manipulating him in the background, slowly along the way over the course of my injury, pretending to be on my team, pretending to help. And what she was doing was manipulating him against me to get him to provide for her and destroy the path that I had him on, which took me his entire life to get him to where I had him, where he could eventually live a normal life. And it was these were all three separate situations, each person. So my oldest son's paternal grandmother, then you have my ex, who's my youngest two children's dad, so the child that's injured with me, and then my mother, all separate. None of these people talk to each other. None of these people have any contact with each other. This was all going on at the same time separately. So it made it an impossible situation. It's not normal for someone to have a catastrophic injury to the magnitude that we did, and the people around them continue on with their lives and then scream delusions when we can't have sound and we're suffering 50, 60 severe symptoms at once, day in and day out, with no relief, in an extreme state of suffocation and brain swelling. It's not tolerable. There's nowhere to reach for help when something like that is going on, because the people who are supposed to be helping in a situation like that would be the people that I just mentioned, who were creating all these problems in a regular person's life. So I don't know how many videos of mine you've watched by now, but you would need to watch numerous of these videos to fully grasp everything that I'm talking about, to understand that I've never been able to live a regular life. And then once the time the injury occurred, it's past the point of no return. There's no way to restore our lives to ever even get to live a normal life going forward. And we're very lucky that we've even gotten us to where we are in the current day, which is still not really a good position. We're just not in extreme physical distress, extreme pain and suffering the way we once were. So yes, you would need to watch numerous different videos to grasp everything that I'm talking about and to fully understand how extreme all of this was and what the current problems still are, because the current problems tie back to all of this chaos and crimes and delusions, screaming, and all these problems all these people created during the extreme part of the injury has led to the current problems I'm still having with the people around us. And at the same time, some of these problems are also jealousy and envy by the majority of the people in our lives, or just I could just say around us. And some of those people creating those problems were part of the jealousy and envy. But there's more than just that. There's many people that are doing this, and because of how severe the condition is and the way we're forced to live, I've been forced to remove many people from our lives along the way, just to keep ourselves physically safe and try to continue to pick up the pieces of the life I had always been building, and then repeatedly getting wiped out due to my mother's ongoing crimes and criminal harassment, with all the other individuals she's used to help her in the agencies, and her herself, all from behind the scenes. So when the injury occurred, it made it 100 times worse, because she didn't want us to survive that injury. At the root, she was trying to collect on the rest of this trust fund. So that is the reason her actions became even more heightened, because that was going on long term, way before the injury, which had caused all of my financial wipeouts along the way, all of the restarts I had to make in my life, due to me building so much success, her being so jealous and envious, and then completely wiping me out, using other people and agencies to cause so many problems and commit so many crimes. It would financially wipe me out altogether, force me to leave homes that I've owned, force me to restart from nothing. So where we are today with all that, there was 3 solid wipeouts as an adult, and a Chapter 13 bankruptcy due to all of that. So that all went on just prior to the injury. And the fact that I've managed to hold on to the home that I currently live in, and hold on to what I have left barely, after everything I've been through and the extreme injury, and how serious all of that was, and the amount of money I had to spend to keep us alive, has created even more extreme jealousy and envy from all of these people surrounding us. So I know it took me almost 15 minutes to basically give an intro on all of this. But there's no way to explain this to somebody in a quick manner, because this is very extravagant. There isn't another human being out here forced to deal with the situations that I'm forced to deal with, which a lot of these situations are criminal in nature. The harassment is all criminal, and some of the actions are criminal. So in order to get others to understand this, I had to give that long intro to even begin at the beginning of what I'm talking about, because it's just so far out of control that people don't have a catastrophic medical emergency and all family members continue on with their lives as if that's not what's going on, while creating chaos and screaming delusions and problems for 3 solid years. It was about 3 solid years before that stopped, once I had to start removing some of the individuals out of my home, in order to even try to recover, because my brain was in such an extreme state of swelling and sagging with the brain fluid leaking out of my ears that it wasn't going to stop due to how severe all of this was. The fact that I was even able to hold on to life that long, for that long of a period of time in that extreme manner, is a miracle, because I don't believe there's another individual out here who's ever had that extreme of a medical emergency, with the people around them continuing to act like that and continue on with life as if that's not what's going on, and then create all these different problems along the way individually. So it all created the giant ball of mess that I'm currently in, and the problems I still have with these individuals. It's still ongoing the entire time. It's never stopped. So going forward, there's all these problems with my son's dad not living in reality about any of this. So I'm going to start at the beginning, when I was pregnant, when this all started, how it got to where it is today, because there's numerous different situations that happened along the way leading to where we are today. And I'm going to have to start at the beginning in order to get others to understand. And the issue is his life keeps getting put in danger, because of the ignorance. So that's why I have to make this video, just because it's so far out of control. And there's so many people just screaming delusions, living on delusions, repeating delusions amongst themselves. Other people, when they think they have knowledge about what happened to us and our injuries, they don't have proper information. They got their information from people who are either jealous and envious, repeating delusions, or were participating in the crimes, or they're ignorant to the condition altogether and just don't want to accept reality. And it's repeatedly putting my son's life in danger, because our injuries are permanent. We are going to be living modified lives for the rest of our life. And part of that reason is because we did not receive proper medical care once the injury became extreme. I guess there was 2 separate time periods where the injury became extreme regarding, regarding him, but me continuously. So due to that, it's led to all of the current problems, and just nobody's in reality about any of it. And because we didn't receive that proper treatment when it was necessary, that's why it's called an extreme medical emergency. Your brain can't go without oxygen while your system is completely overloaded with carbon monoxide, because now you've already had brain injuries due to the extreme medical emergency, crossing the threshold and going past the point of no return, breaking through the brain tissue, flooding the entire system. Usually people don't live to talk about it. If it breaks through the brain tissue in that manner and floods the system, usually people don't live. And if they do, they are in an inpatient situation receiving rest, recovery, and proper treatment. So because that did not happen for us, and people were just living in their own little worlds and wanting to live off of what I've built and portray what I've worked for to be their own work, or just being completely jealous and envious, it created the problem I'm still having, all these problems I'm still having today. So where we are today, a lot of these people have been removed from our lives, and it's going to stay that way, because of where I'm still building things to. I'm on a different level in life. I've been 100% self-employed for 13 years, over 13 years, and I've been self-employed even longer. And others perceive our situation from an outside view looking in and don't have proper information, especially during the time of our injury. Nobody was around us during any of that time except for the people in our household. And anybody who was coming in and out had false information from all of these jealous, envious people who were creating the problems. So I'm going to start at the very beginning, how all of this got to where we are today. And it happened at 30 weeks of pregnancy, when I started working at the restaurant temporarily that caused this situation to occur. I had already been self-employed, 100% self-employed, for about, what was it, about 4 years. I'd been 100% self-employed, and I'd been self-employed even longer. So it was probably about 9 years I'd been self-employed at the time this all started. Now, I was not planning on having any more kids. It was my mother's 2013 escapade that forced my daughter's dad and I to work together, who is now also my youngest son's dad. And that's how we ended up with an additional child. At no time was there ever talk of us being together. I had been building everything on my own as a single successful individual, very healthy, very high functioning, building things all by myself for about 15 years at that point. I'd been single the entire time. There was no talk of us being together. It was my mother's 2013 escapade that caused us to be forced to be together at that time period, to cut her out in the crimes she was committing and the agencies she was using to harass and create chaos. That was the only way to stop it at that time, because it did go on for 6 months, and that was one of the complete wipeouts. When I was getting ready to cash out on a house with all cash. There shouldn't have been a mortgage. So that's what started it in the first place. And then I actually didn't know I was pregnant for some time. And I do believe part of the reason is because I had something called amniotic bands, which was found a little bit later. And it's like 1 in 14,000 pregnancies that someone ever even has that. It's even greater of a chance that or even less of a chance of the baby being born without those bands affecting the baby in some way, shape, or form. So you can Google that, I guess, and look up information on that. But it can cause the baby to be extremely deformed and or kill the baby in utero. So that's what I had, and that's why I believe it wasn't known that I was pregnant for some time, due to the effects of those bands existing. So right then and there, that all started towards the beginning of the pregnancy. Some months had gone by before I even knew I was pregnant. And then, I wasn't planning on having any more kids. Here I was trying to pick up the pieces from my mother's last escapade and disaster, still working on rebuilding to buy that next house with cash. But at the same time, I was working against the clock of the real estate market, which was slowly on the rise, because when I was supposed to do this, it was still very low, and I should have been able to purchase 2 homes with all cash at that time frame if I was not disrupted. So here I was still working backwards, trying to rebuild from the wipeout when all this happened, and it set me back an additional year. But then my son's dad also took a job with AT&T, and at that time he had 2 other children with someone else and had child support on those children. And there was also child support on the daughter that we share, who was at that time like 10 years old, I believe. And because of the money coming out of his check and the pay cut he took to take the job initially, and after you take out taxes, insurance, and whatnot, it left there not being much money in his paycheck. But again, I was already building everything as a single individual without help from anyone. So when all of that happened, and then I was pregnant, I knew I was going to have to take time off, and that significantly set me back as well. And because I had already lost so much, I didn't want to lose anything further. That was why I went to go work at the place that caused our injuries. So because I had already worked in the restaurant and bar industry for 20 years, I didn't think anything of it. I'd never worked in a place that had a carbon monoxide issue or a ventilation system issue. And it was way over my head, not something I ever thought about. And the symptoms were, it wasn't screaming something's extremely wrong. They were more subtle, and more symptoms kind of got added to the bucket. And I was not there very often either. I was only there about 15 hours a week. So the amount of time I was spending in there, it was pretty spaced apart. So it was not known right away. So with me being self-employed and having to take a step down from everything I was doing to temporarily go work for someone else, mind you, I was not supposed to even ever go back into this building. I was supposed to go right back to being self-employed, and was never supposed to go work for someone else again, ever again in life. So at 30 weeks of pregnancy is when I started at the place, and all these strange things started happening. I started losing functioning, started having all these strange symptoms, but nothing to the point where it was screaming there's something terribly wrong. So if all those other circumstances had not happened, I wouldn't have been in the building in the first place, because all this excessive money was coming out of my ex's check. and the messed up part was the money that was supposed to go toward my daughter, because the system is broken, was going to the other mother. So the daughter was in our household, who's my daughter too, and the money is going to the other kid's mom because it's a broken system. So that was another part of the problem. On top of the fact that it was all my work and all of my money leading up into that point, and the next steps I was taking, that was all of my work along the way as a single individual. So by him doing that, it stopped my income with what I was doing, and me being pregnant temporarily stopped my income. And because I couldn't have it stop all the way because of everything that was going on and the amount of losses I already took, that's why I went and worked at this place. So by the time I had the baby, almost 10 weeks later, here I appear at the hospital in Detroit. You can view those videos, are already up under the Detroit Human Trafficking Hospital videos. Under that playlist, I think there's 4 videos. It describes more about what happened all during that. But I arrived there suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning about 11 or 12 hours after leaving the place that caused all this. And they knew something was wrong. They just didn't want to say that something was wrong, or that they knew something was wrong. Maybe they didn't know exactly what was wrong, but they knew something. And so because of that, I gave birth while suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. They did not give us oxygen, which would have greatly changed the outcome of our injuries going forward from that day. Because there was no oxygen given, that created us both to have a brain injury during labor and delivery. I lost the ability to communicate the last 3 to 4 hours of being in labor. I didn't have any drugs. There was no pain intervention. I was in an extreme state of physical distress, screaming, knowing I was going to die. I didn't see the blood work until about 2.5 years later on paper. But I knew by the way I felt that something was terribly wrong, and then I could no longer communicate. And because I don't have a proper support system, it was just the two of us there together, and they saw that he wasn't the brightest crayon in the box. So they had every intention of letting me die, taking my organs, and then they were trying to take the baby as well. That's what they were going for. And looking back on it all now, knowing what I know now, that's what was going on. So if you view those other videos, it'll explain all of that. But I barely made it out of there alive. We both barely made it out of there alive, but we both acquired brain injuries. And then the hospital continued to cover that up. They tried to hold us hostage there. They used numerous methods to try to hold us hostage. And because they were trying to take my organs and take my baby, there was no talk of ever trying to assess what actually happened or what was wrong, or treat us in any way, shape, or form. They were only trying to hold us there until our bodies gave up, is what was going on. So I hurry up and I got us out of there because I knew something was wrong, even though I couldn't communicate properly. And I was trying to just internally try to figure out what was going on. And because when the baby finally came out, I was in such extreme distress, going from that to extreme relief, that I couldn't comprehend that I had a brain injury because I had a brain injury. And it wasn't until about 2.5 years later that I fully understood what actually happened. So it talks about that in those other videos on that playlist. But initially, after the baby was born, my ex went and called people and told people everything was fine and that we were fine. And then later was screaming it at me that, like, oh, if we weren't fine, why were we trying to leave the hospital? He's not comprehending the reality of anything that was going on, and that they never had any intention of helping us or treating us. That's not what was going on there. So you'd have to watch those videos to really get a good grasp of all this. But I knew that if we stayed there, we weren't going to live either way, or I wasn't going to live at least. And then they were going to make sure that he didn't leave with the baby, is what was going on. So at no time were we ever okay. I never returned to normal. I never got back the pieces of my life that I had prior to having the baby. All the way up into that 30 weeks of pregnancy mark, even me being self-employed, if I would have just stopped and not gone into that restaurant, everything would have been fine. We might have had some financial setbacks, or I would have, I guess, technically, because these are my business plans, my life plans, that he's not even aware that that's what he entered into by choosing to be with me at that time period. It's over his head what I was building business-wise and in my life, and the steps I had been taking all along. He wasn't anywhere in our lives for all those years. So it caused all that to be set back. And if I had not walked in that building, this wouldn't have happened. So because I did, this was the result. And leading up to that, I had been working out 5, 6 days a week for years, like 6, 7 years, every day, almost every day, 5, 6 days a week. And I did that all the way until I was 30 weeks pregnant. When I stepped foot into this building, I could no longer work out. And that's actually the first sign of carbon monoxide poisoning. So because I couldn't work out, I never got that part of my life back. I didn't know what was wrong. I did have a brain injury. I couldn't explain what was wrong because it was such extreme distress to such extreme relief that I couldn't comprehend what happened, but I knew something was wrong because I was experiencing all these crazy symptoms. And once I did get us safely home from the hospital, I started experiencing more extreme symptoms internally. And my whole body started swelling up. My heart wasn't processing any of the carbon monoxide, any of the water I was drinking. And it's because I was so overloaded with carbon monoxide with a brain injury, and it got covered up. So here we were suffering from this. The baby as well. He was hard to take care of. He had all these strange issues. He immediately had a choking problem. So that plays a very large role because going forward from birth till he was 3 years old. Shortly after he turned 3, when he had his first hyperbaric oxygen treatment, that stayed a very severe issue. So all these issues appeared shortly after having the baby, and it was just so extreme that I couldn't comprehend what was going on, and I had no medical history, so I really didn't understand it. And at the same time, I was also removed from the place that caused all this. So it was even harder to figure out because at no time was I ever supposed to go back there. So all these crazy symptoms just kept happening, and I couldn't pinpoint anything, but I knew I felt like shit, and I couldn't explain what exactly the problem was, but my heart stayed in a manner where it was beating extremely fast, and I could feel these heat waves running up and down my entire body and all my cells, and I couldn't regulate my body temperature from that point forward. It wasn't an issue prior to giving birth. But it was because we had such low oxygen for so long in that extreme state. And then more of the poisoning set in after the baby came out. And after we got home, that's why it became even worse after the fact. So we just continued on suffering these very severe symptoms. The baby had this very severe choking problem. He choked on everything, every bottle almost, he'd be choking. And that's actually a sign of lack of oxygen to the brain, which is exactly what that was. I notified them right away as soon as the baby was born, and they tried to act like it wasn't a big deal. Even the pediatrician's office acted like it wasn't a big deal, and it's the same pediatrician that I'd had for my older kids for their whole lives. So because she did not see the blood work from labor and delivery, that was part of the problem on why they weren't recognizing what had happened to us, because it was a different hospital system. So it was not shown to them for about 3 years, I think it was. I don't think she's seen it for about 3 years. By the time she's seen all this, I fully knew what had happened, and it explained everything, and then told her when I did find the center, once he was 3, I said, this is where we're going to be. This is what's causing all the ongoing problems we've been having. And I'm not asking you for permission. I'm telling you this is where we're going to be. Hopefully we never see you again. And she just said, okay. And that was the answer. That was what it was. And then we never seen them again after that. So that was 6 years ago, over 6 years ago. So all along the way, I had this newborn baby who had this very serious choking problem. We couldn't have him be babysat by anyone, hardly. My 2 older kids would watch him somewhat, and then my ex wasn't really watching him. I did go back to work. I did go back to being self-employed for about it was about 5 months in total. I didn't go back for about 10 weeks. But I did go back to being self-employed, and I was really struggling. I never returned to normal. I was still having all these strange issues, all these problems. I couldn't lose the weight. I was suffering internally with all these strange symptoms, with my heart just going extremely fast the entire time, never able to regulate my body temperature. That didn't even happen until years later, after I had become even more injured and after we had started treatment, some years into treatment before I was able to regulate my body temperature. And that's two issues causing it was the carbon monoxide poisoning and the brain injuries. So going forward, it was, I basically had to have the baby with me all the time because of the severe choking problem. He had to have a modified food diet for the first, I believe it was 5 years of his life. He didn't eat meat until he was almost 5 years old or a little over 5 years old, because he would choke on it. And he knew he would choke on it. So a couple years after the problem stopped, after he had enough treatment to clear the problem, he knew instinctively, he knew that's what it would cause. So he didn't eat meat for some time. So right after returning home from having the baby, here was my ex running off partying every night. He would go to his job and then he'd party at night and just act like I'm going to take care of this baby, like I'm not the one building all the success, like I don't have what I actually have going on in my life, like that's not what's going on. He made it up in his head that he's paying all these bills just because he took this job that's like good on paper. Like that's not at all what's going on. I still have to make the next steps and make the next moves. I'm working against the clock. The real estate market was on the rise so quickly. I didn't have much time, and I knew that. And I couldn't even get my regular daily functioning back at this point. Although I did suffer and struggle and get by being self-employed for those 5 months, I was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And what it is we were picking up little amounts of carbon monoxide along the way, both me and the baby, because now we're not aware that this is what was going on. And it was causing us to decline further and further and further along the way with just little amounts that are considered safe for the general population. They already weren't considered safe for us. We just weren't aware what was wrong. So here he was just partying every night right after the baby was born. Here I was in and out of consciousness right away, right after having the baby. It stayed that way. And I still never regained any type of daily functioning, suffering and struggling through each day. And then the summer happened shortly after that, and I had to stop taking my older two kids to school. I had always driven them their entire lives. By this time, they were like 11 and 14. So at this point, I had to switch their school so they could ride the bus, because I could no longer get them there or get to them to pick them up because of the shape that I was in, still not knowing what was wrong. I had to take things off of my plate because at no time did I ever recover from the initial birth. That's the first significant injury. I had never recovered. So I started taking things off of my plate, knowing that I have to at least get the money to get into the house that I'm currently in at that time, and knowing I'm on a time limit. So I did that. I removed that from my plate. And then I took a really bad fall because I kept stumbling and fumbling and falling down. And it was due to the brain injury from labor and delivery. And I fell so hard when he was 5 months old that I permanently injured my lower back. It's still a problem today. I don't believe it's ever going to be fully healed, but I did make significant progress with all of the hyperbaric oxygen treatments. And with my body being so low on oxygen and overloaded with carbon monoxide at that time, that's what was creating the extreme amounts of pain and suffering with my lower back injury. Because it was such an extravagant injury, and because you can't see the carbon monoxide in an x-ray, and you can't see what was actually causing it to be so extreme, everybody acted like it wasn't as big of a deal as it was. So that's what led me to go back to the restaurant that caused our injuries. I had no clue that they had a ventilation system issue and a carbon monoxide problem. And I didn't go back there until the baby was 7 months old. So toward the end of 2016 is when I finally returned there. After I was already back to being self-employed, here I am having to take more off of my plate, thinking I'm doing too much, or maybe I'm too old. I was too old to have a baby or something is what I was thinking. But looking back on it, I was only 32. So I wasn't really that old. And because my other kids, I had them, 11 and 14 years prior. So I just thought, I don't know what I thought. Things were just not adding up. So took more off of my plate, returned to this place. It actually got told to me by some customers because I was only there on the weekends, a couple shifts on the weekends. I only worked 2 shifts on the weekends for a few months, and I worked about a year of Friday night, Saturday double, Sunday morning. I did that for about a year of weekends. And then I completely overloaded with the carbon monoxide. But it was a customer who told me there was a gas problem shortly after I returned. They just didn't know what gas, and they said the sign was on the door. But I had never seen any of this. I never really heard what all it was about. And I slowly started to decline more and more and more after returning to the restaurant. And then several months into that, into being back there, is when I was making the moves to purchase the house I'm currently in, which I did end up buying in the middle of 2017. So about a year after the baby was born. But these were the plans all along, which I had been doing as a single individual. So all of this time, here was my ex partying every step of the way, going to work and then partying at night, acting like nothing was ever wrong with us. Except for that's not what was going on. There was things very wrong with us, and he was just acting like we were fine and we were just normal. And he was acting like he was the one paying all the bills when that was never what was going on. The job never even balanced out, even as he got raises, to balance out to where he ever even got to where he was paying half of the bills. It never even got to that point. So that's what was causing some of these issues as well, because here I'm sick and injured, don't know what's wrong and why I'm sick and injured and what's causing all this. And now here I am back in the building that's causing all this, slowly declining, and still trying to build forward everything I was already building for a long time prior to my mother disrupting all these moves I've made along the way, trying to get each piece put back together. And here he is just running off, acting like he doesn't have to be a father, which that's not a secret. It's already known he did not participate in raising the daughter we have together, who at this point was 11, and he did not raise the other two kids that he has. So it's not a secret that that's his behavior. That's why there was never any talk of us being together in the first place. So this all continued on. I kept going to this restaurant on the weekends, and because I was removed each week for the majority of the week, that's what took longer for me to figure all of this out and to become as extremely injured as I became down the line. But because I knew I was working against the clock and I couldn't take any steps further back, and I had to at least get us into the home that we should have already been in. We did use, like, it was my self-employment income. It was not any income from this place who caused all this. I wasn't even there long enough. It was temporary employment, even though I'd been in that industry for 20 years. They were not considering any of that income as my income for the mortgage. And mind you, I was not even supposed to have a mortgage. So it was all of these actions of other people along the way which created the need for me to even have a mortgage in the first place. Um, so I did end up making the purchase with what was shown on paper, income wise. This is why my ex's name had to initially go on this house with mine, because now it's him taking the job that has caused these additional problems. If he did not do that, um, then I would have had the cash difference, whether I had the baby or not. If he had not taken that job, I would have had the cash difference in my pocket to cover what his income would have been on paper for that portion of the mortgage. There would have been that much cash difference, and the mortgage would have just been in my name with my self-employment income, with the cash difference to cover the difference. Well, because I stayed injured and I had the baby suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning, I'm having all these issues. I can't return to my normal life. I'm losing more and more functioning. I'm just slipping further and further away. I had no choice but to have his name on the mortgage, regardless of how much money he was actually giving me toward this, because it wasn't a significant amount. I needed the banks to believe that we could cover it on paper, because even how they were looking at it, my income for my self-employment was only partial for the 2 years that they took counting toward this. When that's so, my income was really double what they were shown. It's just something wasn't right. I had to take time off to have the baby. So because I was injured was part of that, and then prior, because I had to take time off to have the baby, my income truly was enough to cover all of it. But the way they configure it, we had to show more on paper. So that's how his name ended up on the house initially. It should have never been. But then I get into the house. Once we get moved in, here I am still stuck at this place, and I'm explaining to him over, and it's not even explaining in this point, it's full-blown arguing, because he just wants to believe that he's paying for everything, when at no time was that ever the situation. I'm saying I need to get back to work. Like, this is a temporary place filling in very temporary money. This can't last long term. We're going to not have anything. We're not going to have a place to live very soon. This is not meant to be long term. I was never even supposed to go back for that second round. And it just stayed in a continuous argument where he just really wanted to believe it was him that did all of this, even though he was doing, had nothing to do with our lives, had nothing to do with what I'd been building every step of the way. And here I'm sick and injured, dealing with this newborn who's sick and injured with me. And we're having a really hard time getting through each day, through each week. And we don't know what's wrong. So as soon as I got moved into the house, he kept partying all night. He was gone even more than he was prior to getting moved into this house. So I mean, if I was fully recovered and my normal self, which I've been all of my life, I would have never let that flow. I would have never let that slide. He would have been thrown out immediately. The relationship would have never continued. He would have gone on with his life separately. It would have been that right away. But because I still didn't know what was wrong, and here I was having all these serious issues, and I couldn't piece any daily functioning back together, and I'm slipping further and further away, it became an argument because he just wanted to believe that it was his money paying for everything when it was not. So going forward, every night he was gone. Here I am stuck at this restaurant every weekend. This money is not enough to sustain anything. And there's all these arguments because he's not in reality about any of this. He had never dealt with any of the finances. I would never be bringing somebody into what I've been building, because bringing somebody else in is a huge risk, especially somebody that's not on my level with how I run things, how I build things, and me being self-employed and building the success I've been building all these years. I can't bring somebody in who's not on my level, which I already knew he was not. So he never saw any of the finances. He just perceived it in his own mind that that's what was going on, and he's paying everything, even though we're having these arguments regularly, that I have to get back to work. And he's screaming all these delusions at me, acting like that's not where I need to be, when that's what pays for everything, that's what builds everything, that's what provides everything. I've been a single mother all of these years. And it was just argument after argument, when here I'm slipping further and further away. I'm getting sicker and more unwell as time's going on. The baby's getting harder to take care of instead of easier, because at this point he's now almost 1.5, and at 1.5 the baby should be on a full sleep schedule. There should be the baby shouldn't be harder to take care of. Instead, we were going backwards. The two of us were regressing together, and I couldn't get out of this place that was causing it, still not knowing it was this place. So going forward, I stayed there so it was about a year total of those weekends. So it was January of 2018 when I finally woke up overloaded with the carbon monoxide, and my brain was pressed against my skull. And I didn't know what was causing it right away. It was extreme pain, 100 out of 10. And it stayed that way. So it stayed that way for 34.5 months going forward. I didn't get any relief from it whatsoever. I was having other strange symptoms before it broke through my brain 13 days later. But January 11, 2018, I woke up that way, still couldn't figure out what was wrong, went back into the building, even though I should not be standing. At this point, I'm in dire need of this little bit of money that I don't even consider money that's doable to live on. This is temporary. And even further, this has gone on too long, to the point where it's creating financial problems because it's my money that builds and provides. And now I've been stuck here too long. So because when I woke up like that, I figured I needed to just go get what money I could, because now at this point I can't even miss work because of the problems that have come out of this long term, and I'm not back to my regular form of employment. So I went in there anyways with my brain pressed against my skull. I just could not talk to anybody except for waiting on the tables that I was waiting on, and I couldn't communicate with anybody else, or I couldn't crack a smile for the life of me. I stayed that way. And they knew something was wrong. I actually notified them right away. They knew they were causing it. So they started the cover up right away, and I went in there a couple more weekends. And then everything came out after that, after I had the 4-hour brain swelling episode, after I was dead in my bed a couple weeks later. So it was about 13 days later. After I was dead in my bed, I came back. I had the 4-hour brain swelling episode. It then broke through all of the brain tissue, and then all of that carbon monoxide that was, it was all pressed against my brain. It was my brain trying to filter it out, and I had taken in so much because I was in there for very long periods of time with a very high level. It then broke through and flooded my entire system, and I stayed in that very extreme state for 34.5 months. So going forward, here I was with this baby who's suffering all these severe symptoms with me. He's still got this very severe choking problem. It's getting worse. His condition's getting worse. He's now vomiting with diarrhea continuously. He's in and out of consciousness. He's getting farther and farther from having some type of sleep schedule or normal life schedule. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And there was just all these issues that I'm having with the baby, and now I can't even have sound, and I'm stuck like that, and the baby's screaming and extremely whiny and irritable because that's what carbon monoxide poisoning does. So the both of us are suffering in this extreme manner for quite some time, and then going a little further down after the brain injury had occurred, the place was still trying to cover this up that following week. And that was where I figured everything out. So by the time this all happened, I was past the point of no return. They're not trying to offer workers' comp. At this point, I at least need workers' comp. I need medical treatment with the degree of carbon monoxide poisoning that I'd suffered from. Even though workers' comp doesn't cover the baby, that would be a separate lawsuit. Because we had no support system and I'm the one who runs everything and takes care of all these matters, and I don't have anybody to be on my level and help me with any of these matters. I couldn't get proper legal help for either one of us because I also lost the ability to communicate properly altogether. I just stayed in an extreme state of physical distress with all these 50, 60 severe symptoms at once. So it was that incident after my brain broke through where it stayed very extreme, where there was that many more symptoms, and we just stayed that way until we reached well over 100 grand in treatment and daily treatment for almost 2 years before we even reached a place where we knew that that wasn't going to be our case continuously. The place, they still covered it up. I knew what they did. It all came out. They were all talking about it. Everything had come out fully about what had happened. Well, with the way the medical system works, and then at the same time, my mother was participating in pulling others aside, working for that same hospital system. Once she caught wind that something was wrong, they weren't trying to treat me because she was making sure that they didn't from behind the scenes, us still not having a relationship or contact. And then at the same time, because the hospital system employees are not taught to check for it properly and don't understand how it works properly, especially once it breaks through someone's brain tissue, they didn't want to believe that that's what was wrong, even though I knew 100% that's what's wrong. I had no medical history my entire life. I've been extremely healthy my entire life with no medical issues whatsoever. And they didn't want to believe. They were trying to back the employer as well, even though I was trying to explain to them this is temporary. I'm self-made, self-built. I'm 100% self-employed. I'm not even supposed to be there. It's tanking out what I've built, and I'm losing more and more. And they were looking at it like I was trying to sue this place for something that didn't happen, because the way they're taught to check for it doesn't show up with the way they're taught to check for it. So they also played a role with my mother together and separately without her, because we did seek treatment numerous times. So especially once I figured out what was wrong here, we tried to seek some treatment. We were seeking treatment many times, and that was the result I was getting. But I was in such extreme distress, I couldn't even travel from point A to point B. So here I was at that point, stuck homebound, stuck in an extreme state of brain swelling, suffocation, all these severe symptoms at once. At this point, my brain is sagging. After the brain swelling episode, my brain remains sagging. All those knots of carbon monoxide remain knotted up inside my brain all the way until Thanksgiving of 2020. So it stayed that way almost 3 years. And we could not even take in one breath of 1 part per million of carbon monoxide. We couldn't get behind one wrong car. We couldn't get in the car. If one of our vehicles gave off 1 part per million, even starting it, that's how sick we were. That's how close to death we were. And it kept happening where we would just cross paths behind a vehicle that had too much carbon monoxide. Even if it was a couple parts per million, it had us near death in an extreme state, stuck by the toilet for all these years, and even more in an extreme manner if that happened to us while we were attempting to seek treatment. So that kept happening to the point where we're not clearing any of what we took in initially. He's not clearing anything from pregnancy, labor, and delivery. He was not clearing anything that he took in after that before we knew it was a problem. And neither one of us are clearing anything that we're taking in as far as these tiny little exposures that are not, they wouldn't affect a regular person. Neither one of us are clearing any of this from our system at any point. So we stayed that way. We literally stayed that way in that extreme manner for all of those years, almost 3 years. During this time, The people in my household, because we were not getting treatment at a medical facility, and because my mother was pumping up the people around me full of delusions, sending my dad over here on delusions to take my older two kids, bring them back to her. She's repeating delusions to them. They're being returned to my home. They're all screaming delusions, acting as if what happened to me did not happen. Still, I'm the one running everything, building everything, providing everything. And my ex in the same mental boat as he was initially, still going to work every day and then partying every night as if that's not what's going on. Still not wanting to believe that that's our situation, continuing on with his life. And then even at one point, the baby was about 2.5 years old. He had a very extreme choking episode where he almost choked to death on toothpaste. And it was because he couldn't swallow many things he could not swallow. He must have swallowed a small little bit of toothpaste, and he had to get rushed to the hospital. We barely got him through the door, and he must have gotten it down on his own right as we were coming through the door with him, as his face was starting to turn purple. And then I said, you have to tell them what's going on. It's from the carbon monoxide poisoning during labor and delivery, from the pregnancy. By this time, we all knew. It was all known. Everything had come out. I had the records. It was known. He wanted to cover it up at the hospital. Oh, no, that doesn't have anything to do with it. He's not comprehending that we were in an extreme fight for our lives. We had been for some time. At that point, it had been about a year. We were in an extreme fight for our lives at that point. And he's acting like that's not what was going on with us, still trying to cover it up with the hospital, even when the kid almost died from the situation, the effects that he'd been suffering from since birth from it, still trying to cover it up at the hospital. Never told any of his family or friends the truth about anything that had happened. I know he told some of his friends something because at some point they were at my house and they were acting as if I had some mental disorder and I needed attention, and acting like he was the one paying all the bills here when that was never the case. So I don't know what he was telling them, but I could tell by what they said to me that that's what they thought. I said, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I take my entire life? They weren't comprehending everything was mine. This was all my work. This is what I'd been doing all these years. He wasn't with us. So I don't know what he was telling people, but it was not the truth. He was definitely out partying it up all night long, drinking all night, doing different types of drugs all night long, every night. And then my kids, because they were being manipulated by my mother separately, and so was my dad, and they were all creating problems as if that was not our situation, perceiving me to have this mental disorder, which has never been the case. It created more and more chaos, and this chaos ball grew and grew and grew and grew and grew until it finally exploded almost 3 years into the extreme part of the injury, where I was just barely hanging on to life at this point. I knew if the carbon monoxide knots didn't clear, if my brain didn't stop sagging and swelling continuously, I knew if it didn't clear soon, I just wasn't going to be able to hold on much longer. I was in a very extreme fight to stay alive. So was my son. He's running around here screaming at the top of his lungs, continuous brain swelling as well. You could feel the heavy particles of carbon monoxide that were loaded up in both of our brains. You could feel it by touching both of our heads. You could feel it running back and forth and how hot it was. Until we had, it was about 100 grand in treatment that we had before it cleared to that degree where that was not our situation for the both of us. We both crossed the threshold right around the same time. And it was over a year into treatment. So I'd say a little less than 2 years, but definitely over a year by the time that we had reached that point. So at this point, it's actually almost 3 years into the extreme part of the injury, because we did not begin treatment until March of 2019. So 14 months from the time the injury became extreme, we did not begin treatment. And that's due to the actions of all of the people around us, everybody acting like that's not what's going on. This is an inpatient injury. It can't be treated any other way. That's why it took so long for us to finally cross that first threshold, because this is an inpatient injury. And you can't recover from that type of injury and those type of brain injuries without rest, recovery, and proper treatment and care. And there's no support system. It was the opposite of a support system. Every single person was playing a role in screaming delusions. Each person's getting delusions repeated to them. Each person's living on false information, perceiving what they think is going on with us to be something that it's not. And I'm the one just still covering all the expenses, paying for everything, still trying to hold on, paying for all the treatment, trying to keep us alive. And all I could do was try to keep us alive. And then my older son would take care of the cooking. and most of the cleaning, because there was a long period of time during this where he was suspended from school for about a year. So during this time period was that as well. So during that time, he was taking care of that. But separately, he was being manipulated by his paternal grandmother as well. So there's all these issues that came out of it. I'm going to continue this in a part 2. I knew it was going to take me that long to explain this. But I'm going to cut the video right there and come back with part 2 on how it got to where it is today regarding my son. Thanks. Bye.